Hello and welcome to the final webinar of 2025, where we take a look back at all the key data points and milestones for 5G in the year that has just gone, or is almost behind us. The on-demand recording of this session will be shared with you immediately after the event. You can also download the presentation both from the GSA website, and we'll be sharing a link to the slides after the event as well. We will be taking questions at the end, so please, as we move through the slides, covering a whole range of different topics, please do pop your questions into the Q&A box you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can during the event. Those that we don't get to, we will endeavour to answer directly via email afterwards, so please pop in those questions and we'll get through as many as we can. Very quick recap. I'm sure most of you already know GSA very well, but in terms of the topics and the areas that we cover, and we're going to cover a lot of this today in the data that we're going through. GSA is focusing on spectrum, private mobile networks, RedCap, fixed wireless access forum, with working groups covering these topics, and membership. Almost 100 companies now, both across the sort of executive and associate and full members, all who get access to the Gambod databases. The GSA publishes over 160 reports annually, so covering all these different topics you see on your screen. And again, most of these topics we'll be sharing key data from in the slides this afternoon. The data behind this all comes from the Gambod database. As a GSA member, GSA associate, you get unlimited access to all 7 of these databases for every employee of the GSA. So if there's anything that particularly grabs you and go, I wish I had more access to that data, that's the sort of thing I need in my 2026 planning, then Gambod will be the great resource to start with, be able to dig into this data, create your own charts, create your own slides, and support your planning with the very latest market data. But with that, I'll hand straight over to Ian from our research team to take us through the meat of the presentation.
Thank you, Richard. So this is essentially the year in review. So we're going to touch on a lot of the different data and research that's in the Gambod database that Richard just mentioned, and is available on the GSA website. So we're going to cover all kinds of topics related to 5G, from 5G standalone adoption and rollout, RedCap, sometimes called NR Lite, NTN and satellite, fixed wireless access, and private mobile networks. So around this, what we're seeing during this year is continuing investments from the operators in 5G connectivity. A lot of growth, I think, in standalone this year is one of the key dynamics, I think, during 2025. Perhaps a bit later than perhaps the industry expected back in 2018, 2019, when 5G rollouts initially happened. But it is starting to get some momentum, I think, now at the moment. And we're also seeing deployments around 5G Advanced, more RedCap, and we expect more of this to continue during next year in 2026 and beyond. And again, all of this data is available on the website. A lot of it is behind the paywall. You have to be an associate or a member of GSA, very affordable thing to do. There is a kind of subset of it available for free on the website too. Do get in touch if you're interested in any of the data you see in this session. So starting the actual content here, we are seeing this momentum around 5G, and you can see a range of different indicators of this momentum. If you look at the map there, you can see globally 5G has been deployed in most countries globally, even in regions, in emerging market regions. There are still some markets for 5G still to be deployed. And on the data, we're tracking some of those deploying, some of the soft launches, some of those pre-commercial activities. You can see notably, for example, in something like Turkey, or Turkey, you can see it's been soft launched. You can see in parts of Africa, there is some deployment happening at the moment, as well as in South America. Globally, overall, we're tracking 358 operators have launched 5G mobile services, which is a significant number. We see an even greater number, 647 operators in 191 countries that are investing in 5G, even if they haven't yet launched. We also are tracking the 5G devices, and there's a device database in Gambod as well. And you can see here we track not just the smartphone piece, but other cellular devices too, including FWA, fixed wireless CPE, modules, industrial routers, and other categories. And overall, phones still make up the majority of those 5G devices we have in our database, with 54% of total devices are phones. But you can see significant numbers of routers, modules, and FWA CPE devices as well. And overall, we see an 18% year-on-year growth in 5G devices. Moving on, we also have some partner data available within Gambod. This is data from OpenSignal. It tracks the percentage of time that mobile users have spent connected to 5G. This formerly was called 5G availability. It's now, we call it time on 5G for a variety of reasons there. This data represents a 3-month period from 1st July to the end of September. And you can see there are differences in different markets. One of those drivers is the type of spectrum that's being deployed with 5G. If low band is being deployed, people spend longer with an active 5G connection than if only a 3.5 gigahertz, a mid-band type connection is deployed. Because those lower bands tend to be the ones you stay connected to when you're indoors, in rural areas, and are often the anchor. There's another dynamic happening too with this, which is standalone. If you are connected standalone, that means all the time you see the 5G icon in a phone status bar, you are definitely connected to a 5G frequency band, a 5G NR band. If you're on non-standalone, your device may spend time connected to the 4G anchor that's necessary for non-standalone, but only some of the time will a 5G NR band be connected to the device. So that explains some of the dynamics where you see, for example, in the US, much greater time spent on 5G. And that's because of some of the standalone deployments that happen in that market, notably by T-Mobile, that's been one of the more aggressive deploys of standalone 5G globally. And that's pushing up the amount of time people spend with an active 5G NR connection. Going on standalone, we also track the number of operators that have deployed standalone globally. You can see here that the majority of 5G is still non-standalone, but standalone is growing. We're up to 181 operators now in November, as of November 2025, have been investing in standalone. And we're tracking at least 85 operators in 47 countries that have launched public 5G standalone networks, so commercial 5G standalone, and that number is going up as well. So we're seeing that dynamic around standalone. There are reports, I think, on our website you can access on standalone that have greater data on this. And again, this is part of our operator data too. We're also tracking 5G Advanced. This essentially is the brand name for the second half of the 5G era. Services that are based on 3GPP release 18. So the original 5G release was based on release 15 back in 2019. We've gone through several versions now. We're now up to standalone. We're now for 5G Advanced, and we currently track 7 operators having launched a 5G service that is marketed as 5G Advanced. Notably, some of the markets that are leading on this are places like China, but also we see markets in other parts of the world too that are also pushing 5G Advanced features now too. So again, all of this is available in our database. You can see also that there are a number of pre-commercial 5G Advanced offerings in a number of markets too, where we're tracking deployments in progress or testing. We have not just the commercial deployments, but we also track where an operator trials a particular technology in our operator database too. One of the things that is also another feature of 5G that has arrived since those original 5G rollouts is 5G RedCap. So this came in as part of release 17. It requires an operator to have a standalone network. That means it has a 5G network core, and so the device is permanently essentially connected to 5G on a 5G anchor band. what RedCap is really about is lowering the cost of deploying 5G, taking a bit less load on the 5G network, reducing the device cost down by having a simpler device design, essentially reduce capability, which is hence the name. And we're seeing adoption of this in a number of markets globally. We're seeing adoption in the US, we're seeing deployments in Canada, in Brazil, parts of Asia Pacific. We're seeing some activity in Middle East, a bit less perhaps in Europe than some of the other regions. We're seeing this activity not just in the smartphone space. In fact, the smartphone space isn't really what's driving RedCap. Where we're seeing activity is around things like fixed wireless access, where the attraction of having a cheaper CPE, but which can still be a 5G CPE, and therefore can benefit some of those 5G network capabilities, like the ability to put connectivity on a slice. We're also seeing RedCap arrive on a number of smartwatches now. There are a couple I think we track that were launched in the third quarter of this year. And again, it's a natural fit for a smartwatch where there's a benefit to having 5G, but you don't need the high throughput capabilities of 5G. A lower level of 5G connectivity is adequate. And that, again, is something we have both tracked in our device database with RedCap support there, but also in the operator database on which ones have deployed RedCap. Moving on to fixed wireless access. This has been a tremendous area of activity in the wireless space over the last 3 or 4 years. Operators, I think, see this as a way of adding a new revenue stream, particularly if they're a mobile-only, a wireless-only operator. And we see activity in North America and Southeast Asia and across Europe, really in pretty much every region now. So just under half of all fixed wireless access services are actually from operators in Europe, 43%. 24% of 5G FWA offerings are in Middle East and Africa, 18% APAC, 8% in Latin America, and 7% in North America. The drivers behind this are varied. We have a special interest group, as Richard mentioned, on FWA, which is interesting and looking at these dynamics within the GSA organization. But the attraction here is adding that new revenue stream, potentially connecting areas where the fixed infrastructure is poor or old. Maybe there's only copper, maybe there isn't any fixed infrastructure. It also has an opportunity around users that maybe don't want to commit to a long-term fixed offering. So there's a kind of a range of reasons why FWA is jumping forward. One of the other things that we've seen activity on with FWA is the use of millimeter wave spectrum. That was something that originally happened back 2019, 2020 in North America. Hasn't been that much millimeter wave momentum globally since then. But now we're seeing some millimeter wave activity in a market like Italy, where there are operators trying to deliver essentially a fiber-like service, but using wireless and using millimeter wave spectrum, that high capacity, that high throughput, to be able to market speeds up to 1 gigabit per second. So there's interesting dynamics around that we're tracking within our data, and you'll see that in some of the reports that we published. Moving away from the public network, looking at private 4G and 5G. We also have a SIG, a special interest group, around private mobile networks. We have tracking of these. The one thing to be careful on when looking at this slide kind of suggests that if you look at it over time, that there are less customer references being added in 2024 and 2025 to date than in previous years. You need to treat this data with a degree of caution, because the data we're tracking here is the number of private mobile network customers, not the number of private mobile networks. And each customer, they have multiple sites, we have multiple networks. And so although the number of customer references you see is going down a little bit, that's just the new additions. Existing customers are still rolling out private wireless. They may be adding new sites, adding new locations. And that means that the dynamics here, you need to treat with a little bit of care. We see this still as a market which has got growth opportunity. What's notable, if you look at the recent years, is 5G is becoming a much more important part of the private mobile network space than it was in the past. There's this transition from 4G to 5G happening. You can see that, I think, most clearly in the 2025 figures, where we've added 117 customer references using 5G technology, but just 76 with LTE or 4G technology. So a significant majority now are on 5G. If you look at 2024, you'll see the numbers are much more even between 4G and 5G. So there is a momentum here for 5G in the private mobile network space. We also track NTN, particularly around satellite. We're tracking which operators have announced partnerships with which satellite provider, which satellite system. You can see here that the greatest number of announced operator partnerships are with AST Space Mobile, even though AST Space Mobile's commercial service is yet to happen. You see there are a number with Link. Mostly, I think those are in APAC. And of course, there's a rising number with Starlink. We tracked 12 in the database so far, and that's something where there's momentum, there's activity, there are commercial deployments. And you see also activity with Omnispace, Skylo, and Viasat. So this is an area that we're tracking, and it's an area where there's tremendous interest, I think, in it, not just in what's happening now in the 5G era, but this is also part of the plans for the future of the cellular standards. We see improvements coming forward as part of the 3GPP roadmap on NTN integration with 5G. And arguably, this is also one of the key pillars looking ahead to the 6G era that will feature under the umbrella of the so-called ubiquitous connectivity pillar, which is one of those key parts of where 6G is going to. So this isn't just a one-off thing. It's not just hyped now. It's something that the cellular industry sees as a natural extension of current cellular standards to add in non-terrestrial networks, satellite, potentially high-altitude platforms, alongside terrestrial connectivity too, as an additional complement, and also potentially a backup solution if the terrestrial network were to fail. Moving on, we also track spectrum in the Gambol database. There's this deep and comprehensive spectrum database about what kind of spectrum is deployed, who has it, what it's being used for. And as part of that, we're also tracking the switching off of 2G and 3G networks around the world. Typically, when these are switched off, the spectrum gets reused for 4G and 5G. And because 4G and 5G are more efficient, that generally boosts the capacity of the network. You can put more users, support more data volume on the same amount of spectrum when you switch off 2G and 3G. We see some different dynamics in different regions about which one gets switched off first. In Europe, for example, it tends to be the 3G networks that are switched off first. Why is that? It's because really 4G and 5G are significantly better for data, and there aren't many legacy customers that rely only on 3G connectivity in Europe. By contrast, on the 2G side, there are a number of typically Internet of Things type devices, things like smart meters, that rely on 2G connectivity, and that makes it harder for operators here in Europe to switch off 2G networks. In other parts of the world, often 2G is switched off before 3G. In some markets that we're tracking, both of them have been switched off now. So there's lots of interest here, lots of momentum around this. It has implications for the amount of spectrum that's available for operators, the amount of data they can support, the users, but it's still very much an evolving area. And of course, there are regions where there hasn't been much switching off yet, perhaps regions where there are a lot of feature phones in use, in Africa, for example, where there's lots still to happen. So this is, again, an area where the data's in our Gambol database, we publish reports on it. It has both tactical and strategic implications for the industry. I'm going to pause there. We've run through a lot of different data sets, touching on different reports. There isn't a single report on all of this on GSA, but we have reports on standalone, on spectrum, on switch-offs, on RedCap, on private wireless. But I'm going to open it to questions, and I'm going to hopefully be able to answer all of them today. If we can't, we'll get back to you on email afterwards. Let's kick off the questions. Where should we start? So there's a question here about, do you have an insight on 5G FDD, TDD, and millimeter wave deployments? And I mean, yes. I mean, you know, FDD for people who are not aware is frequency division duplex. It tends to be on lower frequency bands. It's paired spectrum. TDD is time division duplex. That's where you have a single block of spectrum allocated, and the operator flexes between uplink and downlink on a time basis. It can alter the amount of capacity given to each, and that tends to be used on high frequency bands. Yes, in our spectrum database, we track the spectrum allocations both on FDD and TDD bands. We have tracking of what millimeter wave has been allocated to. So that's all available in the Gambol databases. I can't tell you every country just now. It's not practical, but it's all available in Gambol. So the question here, are you confident on 5G standalone deployments, or will some operators skip this important phase? It's an interesting question. I think non-standalone has lasted longer than many in the industry expect it to last. I think it was originally a way of allowing operators to deploy 5G with lower cost more quickly. And that's the reason we saw so many 5G launches in 2019, when I think the original target or expectation was 2020. It's because of the non-standalone piece. I think what I see is that it's important to move to a 5G network core with the associated architecture around that. It isn't just about the core. There's a very different network architectural approach to the 5G core compared to an LTE EPC. And operators that have a standalone infrastructure are going to be better placed not just for 5G, but for the future longer term. Because I think the evolution to later 3GPP releases and into the 6G era is likely to be evolutionary for an operator that's already on a standalone architecture. I think operators that have held on to a 4G EPC core and an older architecture that is less software-based and just more old-fashioned architecturally is going to find it much harder to jump forward to, say, release 19, 20, 21, because it will be a bigger jump. An operator that has moved on to standalone is going to find that much, much easier to do. So, we'll see what the operators go for there. I'm not going to predict each one in turn, but I think the expectation certainly from the network suppliers is it makes sense to move to standalone now and move to that architecture because it's a foundation for the future as well. We've got a question on private networks. Does it include hybrid private networks based on the public network by applying slicing or equivalent segregation? I think in our database, we have both fully dedicated private networks and hybrid networks split out as subcategories. So you can look at that analysis within the data set. I think from memory, and I'm not totally the expert on our PMN database, that a purely slicing-based network doesn't count with our current definition of private mobile networks. So if it's purely a network slice, we don't consider that's purely using the public network. I think for the purposes of the database, we assume there must be some dedicated private mobile network hardware, although it might be extended on a hybrid model with a slice. I think it's a great question, though, and I think that's an area that we'll be tracking in 2026 is how widely adopted is slicing. It's very popular, I think, in mainland China for kind of virtual private networks. I think elsewhere, slicing use cases have often been around FWA or certain other areas. I think there's been less use of a pure slicing-based approach for industry, although arguably some things that T-Mobile is doing in the US and sort of some of the other operators in other parts of the world, there's signs of that changing. And I think that'd be an area we'll be tracking in 2026. If you've got suggestions on that, please get in touch on email on things that we should look at. Down the questions
Ian,
here.
there's a question about 5G RedCap devices.
Okay.
So has a relatively high level of implementation offices. Does it mean that device OEMs have been hesitant to deploy RedCap? Is that something we're seeing?
I think it depends on the category. I mean, I think RedCap is not something that we'd ever expected to be, say, a feature on smartphones particularly. I think RedCap is much more suited to industrial type modules, to FWA, to wearable type devices. I think there's been an element of chicken and egg around it, which is that you know, it's harder to justify device deployment if there aren't that many operators with RedCap live on their networks. And equally, it's hard for the operator to justify flipping the RedCap on and going through the testing for that if there aren't many RedCap devices. So there's been an element of chicken and egg around it, I think, in some markets. I think there are signs that's changing. I mean, some of the RedCap devices announced in 2025 have been pretty high profile. For example, the Apple Watch Series 11 and the Apple Watch Ultra 3 are both RedCap. And I think the other use case that I think is driving this on the consumer side is FWA, where if you have a RedCap-based device, you can do things like put all the FWA traffic on a separate network slice, which means you can manage it differently, which I think has advantages. So I think there's an element of chicken and egg, but I think there are signs that that's moving. I think one of the other things to think about with RedCap is exactly where it fits. And really, the capability is similar to an LTE Cat4 device. And if you look at the kind of cheaper devices that are in the market and on the IoT side and on the FWA side, you know, LTE Cat4 were very popular level of devices. But really, there are tremendous advantages moving to RedCap and replacing those if you can, because you get all the same capabilities you can get with LTE Cat4, but you get these 5G features on top that are valuable. And the price point, you know, is similar, and probably in time will be same or lower as the volumes scale up. Other questions we should look at here. I'm just running through. Okay, there's a question of what are the key use cases of 5G Advanced that 5G SA can't support? I think, you know, when you look at 5G Advanced, there's a whole range of different features coming through. There's a lot of features around prioritization that are better when you're on a 5G Advanced network. There's improvements on the NTN side. You know, NTN support as part of the 3GPP standards came in with release 17. You move to release 18, and you get a whole range of better integration features on the NTN side, and that's attractive if you're going down the standards-based approach. If you're looking at RedCap, 5G RedCap, what the chart was focusing on was looking at these kind of fairly, still fairly powerful on a connectivity point of view devices, but lower cost. With release 18, you can do eRedCap, which takes the RedCap down to a lower grade device, to cheaper devices, and adds features around that. So really, it's about a range of features across the network space that come through once you head on to the release 18 from those initial standalone deployments. Other questions here. Okay, how does the level of NTN partnerships change when you consider IoT and not just the direct to cell phone? Any change in the overall leadership share? So I think that's a great question. I think one of the differences between an IoT use case for NTN and a cell phone use case is for a cell phone, you really need continuous NTN connectivity in an ideal world. So as soon as the cellular signal goes away, there's always an NTN satellite above that you can connect to. And that's been one of the attractions with the LEO approach, because you get continuous coverage. If it's a full constellation, it will work equally well at every latitude. If it's geo, it's better if you're nearer the equator. The further north you go, the greater the chance you won't have visibility of an NTN satellite because of the curvature of the Earth, or maybe a hill or a mountain or a building or whatever. With IoT, it's different though. There are a lot of IoT use cases where having a end-to-end connection twice a day may be sufficient. If, for example, you're tracking a container on a ship, or you're tracking something in agriculture in a remote field, and you just want to get, the occasional location data point, or a temperature data point, or a rain data point, or something of that type from a kind of environmental sensor, twice a day might be enough. And in that situation, you don't need as many LEO satellites to give you a satellite overhead twice a day. And so I think there's a whole range of end-to-end players, in addition to the ones we had on that chart, that are focused on the IoT opportunity and are building constellations for a different usage pattern with IoT. The other piece, of course, is that, again, many IoT use cases don't require a lot of throughput. They can be very small amounts of data sent occasionally. When you think about a smartphone use case, initial services today are mostly around emergency messaging, location sharing of that type. But actually, the interest is going much beyond that, to getting to a better data connection if you can, to doing voice and things like that. And that's significantly higher bandwidth than many IoT use cases. So I think there's a very interesting dynamic around, there will be players, and there are players that are targeting just an IoT use case and are building a different kind of satellite platform to fit that need. And it may not require as many satellites, as much capacity as a direct cell phone type player. So it's a great question. It's a good question. And if you want to go deeper on that, please get in touch, because I think we have been tracking some of the IoT end-to-end players as well. Okay, there's another question on direct-to-device. Do you see any operator working with more than one satellite service provider? Is that a possible scenario? I think it's definitely a possible scenario. I think from memory, we definitely have operators that have a different end-to-end partner for IoT from their direct-to-device cell phone service. I can think of a couple like that. I think Telefonica, I think, comes to mind for that. I think possibly Vodafone, from memory. But we can take that offline and drop us an email, and we can probably give you some greater depth and insight around that. I think as far as having multiple satellite providers for a direct cell phone service, I can see operators having conversation and doing deals around that, because the market is very immature, and they may not be sure about which satellite provider will win and how that will play out. So I can see them having those conversations. Whether they would launch a commercial service with more than one satellite service operator for direct device is a more difficult question, and I'd have to think about that a bit more, and probably brainstorm with a few colleagues here and come back to you on that one. But it's a great question. How are we doing here?
Ian, I think one last question before we go
is,
has 5G standalone deployment slowed as monetization opportunities for...
I don't think we've seen signs of standalone deployment slowing. I think, if anything, we're seeing more interest in standalone now than we saw last year. And I think we're also seeing some of the operators that launched standalone are starting to really push services that are leveraging their standalone network. Again, I think of T-Mobile in the US, so really pushing hard with things. And they were actually one of the early operators to launch standalone. I think they launched it back in, from memory, I think it was 2021. But what happens often with standalone is you put in the new core, you flip on standalone there, but then you need to make sure that all your base stations support standalone too. And what we've seen with some operators that launch standalone is that it takes a while to upgrade and make sure all their base stations are also working on standalone mode alongside the core. And so they go through a phase of launching standalone and then basically making sure it's rolled out through the whole footprint. And I think one of the challenges is in that in-between period between launching standalone and having full national coverage on an operator network standalone, some of the use cases you might want to do on standalone become harder. So you kind of almost hold back a bit until you've got the kind of ubiquitous standalone across the footprint, and then it becomes a platform that you can push to businesses and the consumers in a much more cohesive way. When you only have standalone on part of your footprint, it's trickier in terms of building propositions around it. So I think there's a sign of that we've definitely seen in the market. I think as far as interest in rolling out standalone and standalone rollouts, I think the interest has been higher in this year than it was in 2024, I would say.
Absolutely. All right, I think that's all we have time for, so we'll pass back to Richard.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining. Thank you, Ian. Thank you for Charlie. I think you've been busy this year, looking on the basis of those slides. A whole lot of reports there that we've summarised. We included links to a lot of those reports throughout the session. So if you see the links box on the right hand side, you'll see direct links to a lot of those reports, so you can download that straight away. We will be sharing the full recording and the link to the slides immediately after this event as well. One thing I will call your attention to, just published this week, is the special report on fixed wireless access to mark the 5th anniversary of the GSA 4G 5G Fixed Wireless Access Forum. That's available for download from the GSA website. So again, if fixed wireless access, covering things such as AI, RedCap, 5G advanced, and how those technology trends are shaping the evolution, and also some deployment best practices as well from the likes of Telstra and Ditto and Telkomsel as well. So please do check that out if that's a topic of interest to you. We'll be publishing a calendar of events and reports early in the new year, so please do check the website and the newsletter for that information as it is released. For all the data mentioned behind these reports, it's available to members and associates via the Gambod databases. So if your organization is a member, all you need to do is log in with your work email address, and you will immediately be able to get access to all that data within the Gambod database. But finally, on behalf of that, I'll wrap up and say thank you to you for joining. Thank you to our research team for such a vast amount of data produced during the course of the year. And we hope to see you on the other side in 2026. Many thanks.
Great.